I might just I might kick off with some introductions. We've got some people that you guys might not know. So Stephanie Swain is on here from the Monash School of Rural Health, I think. Did I get that right, Stephanie?
Yep, you did. I was in the faculty marketing team, but currently on secondment with Rural Health.
Beautiful. So she's having a look to see what we're doing in education. And so we'll just be kind of lurking around the edges, but feel free to jump in and ask any questions that you might have, Stephanie. And welcome to our Faculty of Education group. I can see people from CPAP on here, as well as some other familiar faces. So welcome to everybody. I'm wondering if you could all just quickly jump onto chat. And this is a workshop about communications planning for research projects. So if you could jump onto chat and just let me know what research project that you're working on, or if this is something that you're just thinking about to do for future projects. So obviously for you, Lorraine, I know that you've got a fairly large research project underway. But for the others, you know, if this is like you're thinking of something very specifically, or if you're thinking about this for future projects. So Lorraine is looking for general tips. Sue is working on a number of small projects. Laura, fitness testing outcomes in HP and curriculum redesign. Wonderful. That's a really great and specific project. So I might come to you for some of the work that we'll be doing a bit later. I'm aware that a number of you have already done the communications for researchers, which was sort of more of a plan around your own career and your own kind of impact goals around your research. And so this one is thinking, sort of applying a number of those key elements that we talked about, particularly in thinking about messaging and audiences, but thinking about it through a research project lens. So, Lisa Hunter, could you tell me what, I don't know what the faculty whitewash project is?
It was called the Grand Challenge for Connecting to Country, but I was trying to get things in quickly while still listening to you. So it gets to the guts of it is the whitewashed faculty.
Okay, so we've got some really great examples, and I look forward to learning more about these research projects as we go through the workshop. So the first thing I thought I might kind of outline is that today is a real step-by-step process. So communications planning is quite an ordered thing, and each element, I think the fancy education term is we scaffold. So we're kind of scaffolding on the previous knowledge that you have, or maybe it's called a sequence of learning, I don't know. So it really is this step-by-step process that we'll be following. And there are 4 key stages in your communications planning, or I've broken it up into 4 key stages. So this can apply for a project that goes over 5 years, and this can apply for a project that goes over 3 months. But the kind of elements are the same, and I guess the ambition would just change according to the length of the of what you're working on. So those are awareness, building momentum, dissemination, and impact. So letting people know what you're doing and why is in your awareness phase. Building momentum, so that's about building your audiences, building the conversation, letting people know what you're working on and what some of the key findings might be before you come to your big moment, your big reveal, and that's disseminating your research findings. And then that 4th element, which communications tools can be really good for, which is measuring your impact. And the reason I break it up in that way is that particularly for longer research projects, you don't want to work for 3 years and then try and then say, oh, I need to speak to, you know, this certain audience, but then not have the channels or not have the kind of reputation in this public facing sphere to have people listen to what you have to say. And I often will talk to PhD students about this, that you spend 3 years working on your research. And then when it comes to telling people about what you found, it's really good to have built that conversation and those audiences and that reputation in that online space, in that public space. So you've got more people listening to what you found out. So the first step is a really straightforward one, but it's probably the trickiest one. And that is like, what is your research project? So this is about, have you guys heard of elevator pitches?
Yep.
Yeah. So, you know, imagine that you've got the dean of the faculty, you run into the elevator, and what's your pitch? And it's got to have really simple language and simple ideas. So the process that I follow for this is identify 1 to 2 key ideas that you want to talk about. And this is in plain English, no jargon, really straightforward, things that people can understand fairly quickly and easily. What impact you want your project to have, and what's your time frame. So it sounds pretty simple on paper. And this is the thing that I probably spend the most amount of mental space trying to develop with researchers. Because what happens, if we go to the next slide, is when you put in your grant applications, it's a really different kind of set of affairs than having an elevator pitch developed. And so this is an example that I have pulled out from Marilyn's FLIR application, which was actually in quite straightforward English compared to some other ones that I've seen. But it's science and engineering concept formation in homes and play-based settings. And it's a programmatic study that aims to research conceptual play by examining imagination in play and imagination in science, engineering and technology. The project expects to generate new knowledge about concept formation in infants, toddlers, preschools and play-based settings. Outcomes include understandings about how concepts can be intentionally taught in play-based settings and learned at home, etc. So you guys get the idea, right? When I first read that, I actually had almost no idea what Marilyn was talking about. And it required that kind of conversation and further reading. And that's not a reflection on at all on the research that Marilyn is doing. It's just the reflection on the kind of language you use in academia to get grants or to put in papers. So we might go to the next slide and see how that process of identifying 1 to 2 key ideas, what impact you want your project to have and what the time frame looks like, how that translated into an elevator pitch. It's a 5-year research project, so you get an idea of scope. Investigating the best way to teach and support young children form concepts in science, engineering, technology and mathematics. People understand what STEM is, but when we were talking about SET, that wasn't very clear at all. And you can see there that we've taken 1 or 2 key ideas from what she was talking about. We've given it a name, the Monash Conceptual Play Lab, which is actually getting simplified the further we've gone on into the Monash Play Lab. Because people can kind of, in that name, the Monash Play Lab, people can understand that it's a research lab about play. I'm wondering if anyone has any insights around that, what that process looks like. Do you guys understand that kind of really simple elevator pitch?
Yep.
Yeah. So great. All right. So what I want you guys to do, Grace is going to pop in the chat a link to a workbook that I've put together that you guys can work through you can work through in your own time and also during this workshop. I understand like this is a process of refining and refining and refining and making sure that you get the words right, and make sure that you're kind of getting out, getting away from jargon. So the workbook that I'm sending through, it is a work in progress. So please send through your feedback. But in it, it goes through this process for you. And I'd like you to take one of the research projects that you're working on, identify 1 to 2 key ideas, think about what impact you want your research to have and your time frame. And just in the next 5 minutes, try and come up with an elevator pitch that, that maybe Stephanie can understand. So Steph is outside of education. She's used to talking to researchers, but something that makes it interesting, appealing, and immediately relevant to her. So have a go now. What are the 1 to 2 key ideas? What impact? What's your time frame? And come up with that elevator pitch. And I'll give you maybe 5. We'll have 5 minutes.
Well, I can't seem to edit it. Is it the way I've downloaded it? Or... Oh, you're on mute.
Every time, Laura, every time. No, it's designed as a PDF to print out and write by hand. So I think that in this instance, just use it as a bit of a guide and sit down with a cup of tea a bit later.
Super.
The other thing, guys, is what is the name of your project? So Marilyn has the Conceptual Play Lab. What are you going to call your project? Okay, guys, can we just jump back? And who's got one that might be ready or sort of ready to be brainstormed? Laura, I might nominate you if you've got something that's kind of ready to go, sort of go.
I hadn't fully finished writing, but I can talk to what I was going to write.
Yeah, it's a very quick exercise, but yeah.
Yeah. So title, working with teachers and young people to enhance, it's long, sorry.
Yeah.
Working with teachers and young people to enhance the psychological and educative outcomes of fitness testing in health and PE.
Mhm.
2 key ideas. 1, fitness testing can be psychologically damaging for some young people. And 2, the curriculum does not require us to fitness test in junior health and PE.
Mhm.
What impact do you want your project to have? Essentially, I want to reduce psychological harm inflicted on young people in health and PE.
Yeah.
Ideally to 0. And what is your time frame? Well, I'm about 10 years in, but I reckon I can finish this current phase in the next 12 months.
Okay.
Is that it?
Yeah, so I'm just writing that down. So your title is Steph, can I get you to jump in? Did you understand what Laura was talking about?
I did. Lara, probably in a similar boat in that the title is a bit long, and once you explained your points, Laura, that definitely made it clearer. But if I was going on title alone, I'd probably have to read it a few times to get the gist.
Yeah, I added, so it was just enhancing outcomes of fitness testing. And then I added the working with because it's got a co-design element.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So I mean, one way to simplify that would be to say, you could simply say you're researching fitness testing in health and physical education, which can be a really damaging psychological process for young people. In the project, you're co-designing different options to produce, I don't know, healthier, I don't know. We producing, yeah, so I'm thinking I'm brainstorming out loud here, but you could put something in there like you're looking for better options for teachers and better options for students. Yeah?
Yeah.
And this is a lifelong passion for you, isn't it? Like,
well, I'm kind of starting to bore myself, but I've got a little bit more work to do before I shelve it. Yeah, but we're there.
yeah, great.
That blog that you helped me put together, like teachers are asking for that now, which is new. Yeah, we're finally getting the impact phase. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that you don't need to do it and it's harmful to children or harmful to students. It's just a really good, great, simple line when you get into your messaging. Okay, so we've got some message from Lisa. Connecting to Country is a 5-year project investigating creating respectful relationships between the Faculty of Education and First Nations peoples' knowledge, cultures, language and histories. I completely understand the scope of that. Lisa Hunter, and I think that is just really clear, and it's the kind of thing that you can get rolls off the tongue really easily. Leanne, investigating mathematical problem solving thinking in imaginative play. So your elevator pitch is too long.
Okay, so
if you want to jump into the chat, you guys can have a look to see it. It needs to be about as long as Lisa Hunter's.
oh, okay, smaller one. All right,
So,
short version.
Yeah, have a go at rewording that. Feel free to send it to me once you've had a reword. And you don't need to repeat yourself.
Sure.
I think you probably only need to use mathematics once in an elevator pitch, maybe twice.
Okay, so the pitch is very short one, so one sentence.
Very short. It's like one or 2 sentences, but put one idea per sentence.
Okay, thank you. I will do now.
Yeah. Okay, so you've got your workbooks, which will help you work through those stages about getting your elevator pitch right. And your elevator pitch will also be adapted according to the next part of what I wanted to talk to you about, and that is working to identify your target audiences. So who do you need to communicate with? So when we're talking about or thinking about research impact, I know it's really important to a lot of you guys to be able to do the research, particularly in education, and put it into the hands of the people who can use it and make a difference with that kind of evidence model that you've developed. So who do you need to communicate with? And I'll just get Grace to kind of move those slides along for me. And we call that your target audiences. And this is like, will be the first question whenever you guys want to do a piece of communications. This should be the first question that's at the top of your mind. Who do I want to talk to? It'll be the first question that I also ask you if we're doing a piece in any kind of communications. Who's your target audience? And the most common thing when people do target audiences is to think far too broadly. So I want to communicate with teachers, for example, and that's actually not a narrow and a specific enough audience to have. So one of the things that can be really helpful is to think about who is the most important person to communicate with. So that might be, you want to communicate your ideas to the person that's writing the HPE curriculum, for example, Laura, or you want to communicate your ideas to faculty staff who are interested in creating change and becoming more educated about connecting to country, Lisa Hunter. Or for Loren, you might be really wanting to communicate with policymakers, but you need to be more specific than that. You need to think, what kind of policymakers, what's their role, how busy are they? And really kind of try and drill down and think about your target audiences. The next question, why do they care about your research? How can your work help them? And how do they get their information is all tied up into that idea. And pretty much what you're doing is creating an avatar and trying to kind of use your imagination or use people that you already know and kind of think, okay, how would they like to get their information? How can I be of service to them? And how can I kind of get them to engage with the work? So what I'll do is I'll show you the next slide is an example of this, which I did talk about briefly in our last workshop, which was the Let's Talk STEM project. So this was a web series produced by Monash Education to encourage teachers to get started in STEM. And when it was a project that I developed with Lucas Johnson. And when we originally started talking about it, his audience really were teachers. And it's like, okay, are they primary or secondary teachers? Are they the crusted on, really traditional teachers? Or are they kind of early graduate teachers? And we spent a lot of time actually workshopping who the audience were to be really specific about the kind of content and the kind of communications that we wanted to create for them. So in the end, we realized that the kind of very old traditional teachers who see STEM as just another passing fad are probably not the audience that will be able to impact and have the most change with. But what we did land on is this idea of STEM champions who were confident in teaching STEM, who needed more engaging resources to bring the rest of their school community along with them, and that they are really keen to feel part of a STEM community who can sort of see the power and the magic of STEM. They engage really regularly with Twitter and with Facebook. So STEM curious teachers was the other audience that we landed on. And in thinking about them and the kind of answering those previous questions about why do they care, how can we help them, and where do they get the information from, we landed on this idea that they open to the idea, not really sure where to start, like all teachers super time poor. Where they graduated, like how far out in their teaching career that wasn't so much of an issue. Active on Facebook and Instagram and interested in PD, in professional learning and going forward. So these audiences absolutely defined all the communications and our approaches to the project. We produced longer form video content with resources for the STEM champions that were hosted on a website. And that was designed to sort of be shown we imagined it being shown in staff rooms or during kind of professional development days. And we also developed resources for them in short form video on Twitter. And that in turn informs the talent that we used to take part in our Let's Talk STEM web series, because we wanted people who were very active on Twitter and who had much bigger followings than we did. And the other thing is that this was a resource produced for teachers and also from teachers. So we really kind of used the questions to be sourced from the teachers and to create kind of snackable themes. So I'll get Grace to just pop on the kind of trailer that we produced. So we produced 4 6-minute videos, and then we produced a series of shareable Twitter trailers. And this was the one that we used to launch the project. Can everyone hear it?
Education,
Yes.
when teachers who are, or people who are experts in a certain field, they say, of course this, of course that. No, not of course. Assume people don't know anything, because then you're bringing them into that world. You're bringing them into that subject that you're teaching them. Not everyone is engaged. You see up to year 12, so few girls in particular engaging with sciences, with mathematics. That's incredibly worrying, and it's down to the fact that it's not made interesting for them.
When teachers don't really want to give it a go because they think, oh, I don't really know that.
It's not rocket science.
It's not rocket science. If I could do it, anyone could.
What is rocket science? What drives you crazy when it comes to STEM education? When educators and when
Okay, so we can just stop that here.
experts in
Grace, I'll just get you to scroll up a little bit. And what you can see here is that, like, all of these experts, there are some teachers mixed in there, there are experts. We plan to be able to disseminate this piece of communications across Twitter to get the STEM champions engaged and to produce resources for the STEM curious. So you can see how this kind of work around target audiences really informed a lot of the kinds of communications and certainly the channel of communications that we opted for. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yep.
Yeah. Great. So I'm going to dump Lily. Welcome, Lily. Now, in the workbooks that I produced for you, you'll see a process to follow to kind of identify your key audiences and then prioritize them. And I encourage you to do that, sort of to go through the workbook after this workshop as well, because this can take some thinking and some brainstorming. So I thought I'd just take you through what it looks like, this process to brainstorm. And Lily, if you can jump on, I'm very sorry.
That's okay. So what should I be doing?
So your project is empowering refugee background EAL students through drama. It's a 1-year project that aims to provide opportunities for Year 10 refugee background EAL students to develop their intercultural and personal and social capabilities through drama. So who is your audience?
Well,
Who do you want to know about your research?
yeah, the main person is, well, this is at the very, very beginning stage. It's just at the stage where I'm talking with people. The very first person is the assistant principal of a particular school. And then the other one is a professor from another university. So these are the two main people that I have been speaking to. And of course, a Year 10, refugee background students, they would be, then later on, they would be my audience that I would be looking at. Yeah.
So when your research is finished, who do you want to know? Who do you want to be able to communicate with about what you've discovered?
It's the TESOL community. So there is Victorian TESOL community. That's the very first community that I would like to communicate my research about. And then the other one would be the wider TESOL community. That would be, international ones.
Okay. So when you say Victorian TESOL community, are they teachers?
Yes, they are a mix of academics and teachers, and it's mainly an organization that benefits teachers, provides professional development opportunities for teachers through academics and through other teachers.
And when you're talking about teachers, this is a drama project. So are you thinking about drama teachers?
Well, no, it's the other way around. It's the EAL teachers. But then one area in EAL teaching is that people who are interested in drama, and they are EAL teachers, they implement drama in their teaching. And the drama is a way to empower those students because it provides a safe haven for the students to experiment a lot of things that they're not, that they have no consequences for them in that safe environment. So they experiment there and then they go into the outside world. And it helps with their intercultural development and personal and social capabilities development.
Okay, so what we're landing on, that at the end of your project, you would really like to put into the hands of EAL teachers who are interested in drama and who are passionate about empowering their students, an example of an evidence-based project that has worked.
Yes. So what happens, the problem with these students is that in year 10, they don't continue their studies, or even if they continue up to year 12, they don't set realistic goals because there's a lot of other factors coming into their decision making. So this drama and this kind of workshop is aimed to help them with getting them to understand who they are, what culture they bring to this context, and what culture they need to pick up from this context and negotiate that identity. So then they would, at the end, we would get better results when they decide for year 10 and beyond. So that would be the evidence that this has been working. So better goal settings.
Right. So if we go to this idea of who is the most important person to communicate with, why do they care about your research, what work can help them, and how do they get their information? So what we're landing on are EAL teachers who are interested in drama, who really care about supporting their students, right?
Yes, correct.
So why they care about your research is because you are going to give them tools to keep students engaged in school.
Yes.
Engage, empower and engage their students.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then how can your work help them? Again, you're going to give them the tools and show them an example of a project that you've worked on.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so the next question is, how do they get their information?
Well, one way of getting their information would be through the workshops that we would run at TESOL. And that's where it's announced to all the teachers, all EAL teachers and all interested people, and they can come and, participate in that workshop.
Okay. So there are other channels that you can think about. We can drill down a little bit later into thinking about it, because you know these teachers better than I do. I'd imagine that these kinds of teachers are probably, they could suffer a little bit of burnout.
Yes.
Because it's a really tough job that they're doing, and it breaks their heart when the students don't continue.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, some of the communications that you might be thinking about are communications that are really going to inspire them about the difference that your research and your approach can make to children or students. And probably a story of change might be something that's really effective in lighting up, in getting these EAL teachers excited and like hooking into their values.
Yeah.
And I would say that, I mean, I'm making a big assumption. I'd say Facebook and Instagram are good places for them, but also industry publications. So TESOL Victoria, I think, has a newsletter. Are there blogs? Are there, like, what are the channels that you can think about?
Yeah, they have a journal, and they mainly have a journal. Yeah.
Okay. And look, this is a great example of a project. If you're going for that inspiring angle, to think about media around a case study, a big, beautiful photograph case study that can also inspire those teachers and make them know that there is actually, drama makes a big difference in the lives of these refugee background children and helps support them continue in their education. So that is an example of a way of, guys, that you can really hone in on in thinking about your audience. But that has really defined a lot of the work that you might do, Lily, in planning out what your communications project might look like over the course of your work. And you know that one of the key values of your communications that you're wanting to do is that this work can make a difference in keeping refugee children in schools.
Yes.
Because you know that that's what your key audience really cares about. So if we move on to the next section, it's a beautiful segue. Does anyone have any questions about that process? It's not always as straightforward as that. Thank you, Lily, for providing such a beautiful example.
And
But it does take some work.
Yeah.
Because in sort of creating an avatar of the kind of audience you are, you can think about, well, how can I be of service? How can I support them? So if we move along now to the next section, which is what will you communicate? So this is the work that I've done with you guys before around key messages. And now one of the reasons that it's really important to develop key messages for your project, but also for every piece of communications that you're doing, problem, solution, action, is to really think about what we call in marketing the rule of 7. So that if you're thinking about, I don't know, buying a pair of shoes, for example, it takes 7 moments of contact or 7 pieces of marketing information, of communications, for an idea to sink in and for a consumer to take action. And so when you develop your key messages, you really want to make sure that they're consistent. So over the course of you communicating to a kind of slightly burnt out EAL teacher who loves drama and is passionate about their students, that they're getting a consistent message over time, so that when they're ready to do that PD or to implement that new project in the classroom, or in the case of Laura, to not do fitness testing and to do something else, there's been this consistent message across all of your channels over the course of the project. So problem, solution, and action. One of the things to think about is to have a key statement in each of those areas and then evidence to back it up. So if we go to the next slide, this is an example that we did for World Teachers Day. You guys know about this project that we did. So it was a research with Fiona Longmore and Amanda Heffernan, looking at a big national survey on teachers and how they were feeling about their work. It was also we did concurrent research about the attitudes of Australians towards teachers and the teaching profession. And it was really designed to shift the conversation about teachers. So problem, teachers have a massive impact on our lives and communities, but research shows that they feel unappreciated and overworked. Teachers are caring, committed professionals who want to make a difference. Unless we act, Australia will soon face a teacher shortage. The research shows that we need to reduce the administrative burden on teachers and give them a clear voice in contributing to policy. And then the action, which is where you think about your audience. Our audience in this case was it was really easy to say our audience is the general public. We want the general public to change their attitude about teachers. But in narrowing it down, we thought women between 40 and 50 years old with school-aged children would be one of our key audiences, because we knew that their behaviours online are more sharing and caring. They're more likely to share content and participate in a social campaign. They have children at school and they still remember a teacher who made a difference in their own lives. So it's time to acknowledge and celebrate the work of teachers. We encourage people to hashtag thank their teacher. So these can be tweaked slightly, and they were tweaked across a whole range of different channels. You can see there that key statement and then some percentages. A different way of saying 71% of teachers feel unappreciated. 7 out of 10 Australian teachers feel unappreciated. But these were kind of like the very base key messages that we ran throughout the course of the campaign, but also in our media release. Does this make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Great. So thinking about your project and having a look at your workbooks, and I know we've done that for your career recently, but think about specifically about your project. What is the problem, solution, and action that you want people to take? I'll give you guys about 5 minutes to work through this and then we can come back. Feel free to jump on chat if you have any questions to ask me. Alrighty, guys. I'm going to jump over to Beatrice, if you're there. So I really loved your elevator pitch.
Thank you.
So for everyone who, I'm just going back to it here. So International Students and Food is a one-year project that aims to work with international students in Melbourne to understand what it is like to be food insecure and find solutions to this problem. Really clear, right? Stephanie, you got that?
Yep, really clear.
Instantly, you totally know what you're doing. And we also know why, because the problem is in the background. So in thinking about your research, Beatrice, who are you trying to reach with your findings? Who's your audience?
I think we're thinking on being able to engage students, but also people who make decisions about student well-being across universities.
Yeah.
And charities, charities who work with food insecurity, and just the community leaders for the international groups, if that makes sense, and maybe city councils if the solutions that, like, it will depend on what we find. So just to clarify, this is a proposal we're working on.
Doesn't matter, this is great.
So no findings yet.
The biggest, I would imagine that a really important key audience, the people that make decisions about how to support international students at universities. Yeah. So what are your key messages? What's the problem?
The problem is that there are food insecure students, international students, and that the solutions that are in place for other types of communities are insufficient. We are assuming, we think, are insufficient for this particular group of people. So I guess the action we want them to take will be oriented to thinking broadly about food insecurity, so thinking about aspects related to culture, not only being able to get food, access food, any food, but culturally appropriate food.
So that's so I understand you're working on your proposal, so it's probably so basically what's another way of saying food insecure?
Oh, hungry students sounds dramatic. I don't know.
I know, it sounds like my 14-year-old who raids the fridge. So international students don't always know where their next meal is coming from and are at risk of starving. Might be a way of encapsulating that problem. That might be too dramatic for you, but certainly COVID showed how vulnerable they are. The solution, I think you probably need to do a little bit more work about that. I wasn't clear what you were calling for, but perhaps a solution might be we need to investigate what holes there are in the system for international students to make sure that we take care of people living in our community. And then the action that you're thinking about people taking might be that you want them to use your research to make change. So that might, you'll end up with a couple of lines about that, but then you can think about, okay, where are they going to access the research? How are they going to find out about what you're doing? But this problem solution action model, I've drawn it from it's kind of a quite activist model, thinking about where you're wanting to create change in systems or you're wanting to close the gap in Indigenous health. I think I mentioned that last workshop, that this is the model that we used during the Close the Gap campaign that ran to close the gap in Indigenous life expectancy. What's the problem, what's the solution, and what's action that you want people to take? So an action, as I've explained before, doesn't necessarily have to be sign a petition or click this link. It can be think again. Or in the case of Lily's work, an action might be teachers can register now for our free PD. That might be the action when you're thinking about that audience of EAL teachers who want to make a difference with their lives of their students. Has anyone else got something that they'd like to share? I've got one here from Lisa Hunter. Teachers report feeling concerned that they might not get it, that they might get it wrong, don't know enough, and don't want to be disrespectful when asked to include First Nations peoples, knowledges, cultures, languages, and histories into their curriculum. We can build a sharing network as a solution and come along and find out what others are doing. That's great. I think that's a really clear problem solution action. With the problem, I might simplify it a little bit. Teachers tell us they're worried about getting it wrong when it comes to teaching First Nations content in their classroom. Because you want to be able to kind of keep the language quite simple and keep the ideas accessible and easy to come off the tongue. Remember, one idea per sentence is good for a key message. And your action, come along and find out what others are doing, and then plan for action in sharing circle for ways to embed ways of knowing, being, doing into a curriculum to demonstrate 1.4 and 2.4 ATSL standards and include the cross-curriculum priority 1 in your teaching. Okay, so that doesn't register completely, it doesn't roll off the tongue completely easily, but that could be part of the solution. We can build a sharing network, and so we can build a sharing network of teachers who can plan to include, to cover the areas of the curriculum and meet the ATSL standards in a way that feels safe, for example. So Lisa Hunter, in thinking about your audience of teachers, we know that they're feeling concerned that they're going to get First Nations content wrong. So having messaging about feeling safe would be a really good inclusion in your solution. Does that make sense?
Yep,
So
yep,
thinking about,
that's a nice idea.
yeah. So, you know, safe, in circle, explore ideas, and kind of in an environment of protect, because teachers, we know that teachers are feeling vulnerable. So keep working on these key messages, guys. And as I did with these examples, really bring it back to thinking about how are you solving a problem for your audience. So Lisa Hunter will be helping them feel more safe and secure. Lily will be empowering teachers to support their students and giving them a dash of inspiration. And Beatrice will be giving an evidence base for universities to make better decisions about supporting their international students so they don't starve. Make sense? Okay, so that's the kind of meaty part of your communications planning, and this is the stuff that you do right at the beginning. So I hope you're all enjoying our little trip to Utah today. And this part is about channels. And so the work that you've done about your audience really informs channels that you're going to use. So this is like the where you will communicate your ideas. So in thinking about that, how you reach your audience. So it defines where and how and even when you communicate. So these channels, for example, are media, social media, plain English articles, industry. It takes time to build your audience, and to build your audience, you need to be offering that service and continually not just talking at people, but talking with people, so that when you're ready to disseminate your research findings, that you already have an engaged audience. So there's a few different ways. I've outlined them in your workbook, and there are also more resources on the intranet, but particularly around working with the media. So there are a number of different ways that you can work with the media. You can proactively pitch a story, and you're supported at Monash to do that by us, so Seshna and myself, but then also through our Monash main media team, and also through Masira. So there are a number of different ways to support you into getting your message out there. So for example, at the end of a research project, you might think about doing a kind of a reveal of what your findings are. We can also position you as expert talent. So say, for example, there's a story about international students going hungry. Beatrice, even before you have your research findings, you can be an expert in that space and put yourself forward as an expert to be able to talk about this kind of the research that you're doing and the experiences that you're hearing in doing the research. If there's a breaking story, I'm thinking, Laura, maybe there's a breaking story about body image and health and PE. That could be a place that you could come in as an expert and say, actually, fitness testing isn't really that effective. It's not needed in the curriculum and it's doing damage. We need to have better ways of getting young people to be fit and healthy and engage with health. Yeah. So you can be that expert. And Lisa Hunter, as you know, we talked previously about your work that you're doing with in surfing. So you can be ready as an expert, you know, if there's a breaking story happening in international surfing, particularly in Melbourne, or if there's a case of sexism that's happening around surfing, you could jump in as that expert to have that expert commentary at the time. Does that make sense, everybody? Great. And I've got a comment here that the AARE EduBlog is great, and really it is. So this is the kind of the third point around plain English articles and industry, so industry blogs. It is a really good way to put your ideas out there and make it much more accessible, not as academic. And writing plain English articles is also a really good way to flex your muscle when it comes to talking about your research in a public space, because you're already defining and simplifying and sort of crafting your key messages in ways to make a broader audience understand what you're talking about, so not just that academic audience. So there are lots of examples of different channels that you can use. So media, you've got support at Monash to do that. Social media, I'd encourage you all to be able to set up your own social media kind of platforms. So Twitter and LinkedIn. LinkedIn articles are actually a really good way to reach your audience. There's social media channels at Monash, at the faculty, which I run and Grace runs, which can also disseminate and distribute some of your ideas. But we always need it to be in the form of really great content, because we want our audience to be engaged. So those plain English articles, the AARE blogs, things in Teacher Magazine, opinion pieces, there's a whole range of different channels that you can use to kind of put your research activities and your research findings out there. And the most effective way to think about which channel to choose is to circle back to your key audience. So for Lily, Teach Space, which is the Monash education content hub that we produce, would be a really great audience, really great channel for you, because our audience is teachers and we advertise on social media to reach teachers. So we could actually, reach out and do an EAL teacher. But if you do a Teach Space article about this research work that you're doing, you can then send that link to the TESOL network and get them to retweet it and to share it with their audience as well. So it becomes a resource as well as a way of communicating with your audience. Okay, so I'm going to just move on to the next kind of, actually, I think I'll ask you guys, we've got a little bit of time. Laura, could you put forward some channels that you think would work really well for your research project?
Well, I'll tell you what I do, and then you can probably tell me some better ways. So I've done the Monash Teach Space blog, Twitter, and then Justin and I have our own little website that broadly speaks to transforming health and PE. So I put a different version of the Teach Space one on there.
Yeah.
And then, presented at conferences. I think that's about it.
Okay, so I think for you, one channel that you could really think about, well, you've got a couple of things to think about. So I think that you could probably be doing more in the space of establishing yourself as an expert in the media, if and when you're ready to go there, because I know you've been burned before. But you could look at doing an opinion piece about why fitness testing is rubbish.
So you see, that's what I don't know. I don't know if I wrote one, who I would send it to. And
yeah. So I would look at, the thing with opinion pieces is that you have to hook them to something that's happening in the media.
Yeah.
So I would look for like data that comes out about young people and fitness and health, or you might have data that comes out about body image. Like the Butterfly Foundation might release a report about body image, for example, and then you could kind of use that being in the media cycle to hook it into an opinion piece. There are guidelines on the intranet about how to write an opinion piece. And what you can do is you can like work through me or Sash, and we can work with the media team. You can send them the draft, they can edit it, and then they'll pitch it for you.
Or maybe I'll just write one, and then the next time it comes around, which it inevitably will, then I can send it to you.
So Lisa Hunter asked, does the data need to be new? Some of the old issues we keep writing about are old problems which ignored solutions, so there is older research. No, the great thing about doing public facing work and being an academic is, first of all, you're really trusted in the scope. You know, in the era of fake news and people kind of not trusting the internet, people really trust academics. And so if you've got data that says women in sport, women in surfing suffer sexism, it's enough for you to say, research shows XXX. Yes, really, 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 you are trusted because you are academics. I mean, maybe if you were climate scientists, maybe not so much. But yeah, academics are trusted and researchers are trusted when they look at the kind of public perception scales. So it's a really good opportunity to have some research and evidence out there. But the data doesn't need to be new, but the news cycle, it needs to be topical within the news cycle if you're pitching it to media. So if you're doing stuff around surfing, there probably needs to be surfing stories out there. If you're doing stuff about online learning, for example, definitely go for you know, now when everyone's just gone back into lockdown, and you'll see an example of that. So Fiona Longmore has just published a piece about the impact of having to pivot all the time due to COVID on school principals, which has been published in Lens. Okay, so any other questions about channels? Kathy, have you got any, what are your channels that you're thinking of?
Thanks, sorry, it just took me a while to get the mute.
I'm probably breaking all sorts of teaching rules here by just like pouncing on people in Zoom, but you know.
That's okay, no, that's okay, it's hard. It's hard.
Feel free to school me on my pedagogy later.
No, it's okay. It's Beatrice and I actually working on the same project, and that's been the one I've been kind of workshopping in response to your questions. So this project on food insecurity. And I guess, yeah, so I guess our audiences are people like kind of decision makers who develop perhaps initiatives and programs designed to support international students, and it could be people targeting food, you know, like kind of food aid programs specifically, but it could also just be like broader programs as well, because food insecurity is linked to lots of different things. So, but I've been thinking about the type of which is the best way to kind of package the information that we collect, and like I had thought like kind of a 1 to 2 page kind of plain language policy statement that we tailor to the different audiences, like for example like the university or those community groups, community leaders, you know, or you know, government or NGO sectors that we've identified that might be in a position to kind of support this group, but that's kind of like directly sent to them rather than, but yeah, maybe Twitter as well, or you know, I'm not sure, you know, industry blogs perhaps, but I think not necessarily those education blogs that people have been talking about. I don't think. Yeah, I'm not too sure. Laura, sorry.
I'm going to go a bit lateral here for you. I'm going to think like LinkedIn.
Oh yeah.
Might be like writing a LinkedIn article and engaging with people that are working in international education. So what are they called? IEAA, International Education Association of Australia or something. Okay, so they have a massive following on LinkedIn. So working with them, for example, and leveraging their existing networks, and a whole bunch of policymakers and people follow them.
Yeah.
So kind of working with IEAA, or tag, even if you're not working with them, you can tag them on LinkedIn, write an article. They can share that article. It's a piece of content that is then kind of, you can guarantee that they're advocating for food security for international students. Because their whole role is to advocate for international students and international education. So you could go a bit lateral like that. The other thing is that if you're doing media work, you absolutely will need to be able to find case studies.
Do you mean like students who can say, oh, you know, I couldn't find, you know, I didn't have enough money that week and I couldn't find my food, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So, and there'll be, like that is a really sensitive area. Same for you, Lily. It's a sensitive area talking to refugee students. But you will be able to find, working with your allies and partners, people who want to advocate for change. And they can be, instead of a researcher saying international students are going hungry, you can have somebody saying, I went hungry.
Yeah, absolutely. That's much more powerful.
And if you do media, that's the kind of case study that you'll need to go along with that. The same for you, Loren, thinking about your CPEP. thinking about your project is that when you are releasing your findings about, job insecurity or job instability for young people, you'll need a young person or a number of young people who can speak to what your findings are, because that will be what brings the story alive for the media, and it's what will bring the story alive to the policymakers and the people that you're trying to influence. Does that make sense? Yeah, great. Okay. I know. Thank you, Lorenz. CPAP. Right. So what I thought we could do is for the last bit, because I know a lot of this is quite overwhelming. And what I've done is broken it up. So I'm coming back to that idea about the 4 phases of your communications. And I've outlined this in more detail to think about what this might look for you in the workbooks. But if you kind of think about it as 4 seasons. So if you're in winter, when everything is dormant and you're doing lots of thinking and planning, that's your awareness phase. So that's when you're working on your strategy. You're thinking about how to boost your researcher profiles. So for Beatrice and for Kathy, if you're working on this international student food insecurity project, what you're doing is starting to say, okay, well, who are the people that we will need to influence a year from now when we have our findings? And that would be like, okay, we need to boost our own profiles and start connecting with these people that are in our key audience. So with the, like, follow the chief executive of AIEE, start to follow the people at Monash and other universities who are the head of international students. And you can find that out on Workplace. You can Google it and start engaging with those posts. But make a list of those people who you want to influence and start to build your following and start to follow them and engage with them in this kind of awareness period. So what you're wanting in this period is for people to know that you're working on this project, that this project is happening. So for Lily, you probably want to be having hey, I'm just kicking off this project. We really want to find out the ways that drama can empower refugee students and keep them at school for longer. And so those drama teachers, the EAL teachers who are feeling kind of burnt out go, wow, this is a really interesting project. I'm really keen to find out what Lily and her team finds out. And the same again for you, Laura. Although you're coming to the end of a very big, long project, in this phase of awareness, you're going to wanting to just be increasing your visibility, your profile in this space, comment on other people's posts, say we need to get it right in HPE if we're wanting to create positive body images for young people, or whatever it is that you decide your key messages will be, but start kind of thinking what that's going to look like a year from now and start to build your audience. And this stage is also about content planning. So think about what are the things that are going to be coming up. Lisa Hunter, in the course of your 3-year project, what are the opportunities that are coming up that we can create and capture content to be able to engage our audience? Now, one of the things is that people remember things in video. I think the retention rate in video is 90% versus the retention rate in something that's written of 10%. So it's worth, in this awareness phase, think about, okay, in our content planning, is there a key moment when we can think about capturing video? The example that I always give is if you're working at the zoo and you're wanting to raise money for, I don't know, protecting the lions, then what you want to do is plan your content around when the lion cubs are being born, which is a hugely, and then you might have a public campaign saying, what are you going to call the lion cubs? We've seen that. But just, you'll have your 12-month calendar or your 3-year calendar. You'll be able to kind of go, okay, these will be key content moments. Then moving on to your connecting phase. Sorry, I'm just going to go back to that awareness phase, and I'm looking at the worksheet that I prepared for you. The other really basic things to do in this phase is update your Pure profile and include the keywords about this research that you're doing. Make sure that your Twitter and LinkedIn bios reflect this research and the messaging that you'll be developing for your research project. And kind of really think about what that social plan will look like for you. For a 3-year project, and Lisa Hunter, you have suggested we have World Pedagogy Day, please no. But you actually saw I Am Reconciliation as a hashtag. And so you can think about, well, what might the hashtag be for my communications program over the course of my research project? In this phase, in this awareness phase, so if it's a 3-year project or a 4-year project, this is year 1, but you might think about getting professional project photos because that can carry across all of your communications. And that's what we did with Marilyn Fleer. You'll see pictures of Marilyn running around looking like a bee or pretending to be a bee with a bunch of little kids. And we've used that photo and over and over and over again, because that shows that she's engaged with the grassroots of her research. And it's just, you know, bright and colour. Picture tells 1,000 words. And think about what your kickoff for the project might be. Do you have a meeting? Are you going to get everyone together? Is there, you know, what that kickoff might look like? And that can also be a piece of content for your social media. So then moving forward to phase 2, so maybe year 2, or if it's a 3-month project, month 2. And I've called this connecting. So this is where you build momentum for your ideas and really start to tell the story of your research. So you're growing your audience, you're establishing your researchers as thought leaders. So for Kathy and Beatrice, this might be that you do an opinion piece about how it's not good enough that international students are starving in Melbourne. It might be that you do a Monash Lens piece that says, as a university, higher education has to do better by its international students. And you might co-author that actually with one of your research partners, because then you'll be leveraging their networks. So that's where you kind of start to develop that thought leadership reputation. I think this is really important for you, Laura, and I know you already are that thought leader in the HPE space, but kind of breaking out a little bit and sort of getting to those HPE teachers who don't necessarily agree with what you have to say. And Lorraine, absolutely, this phase is really important for all of the researchers in the CPEP program to really start to establish them as thought leaders. And again, like, think about producing content. So maybe a video case study might be good here. In this phase, you can think about gathering testimonials, photos, names, quotes to share, celebrate your successes and collaborations, and making sure that every journal article that you do or get published is translated into an industry blog or a Teachspace article or something, so everyone can access these ideas. Then moving into your dissemination. So this is when you have your research findings, and I've done a little bit more work in the workbooks for you to really kind of map out what that looks like. Will you have a report? What are your key findings and messages? Who are your audiences and channels? What content do you need to communicate these findings with? Do you need a story of change? Do you need an inspiring video? Do you need photos? So Melissa Barnes, for example, did a project around a pilot project working with Afghan women in a school homework club, and we had some great photos that were produced that can now be used to apply for more funding to extend that program. So what kind of content can you plan for? What media? How will you communicate your research findings with your key stakeholders? So everyone that's participated in your research project, how are you going to tell them what you found and what the outcomes were and what change they've been able to create in the world? So I take part in a Living in Australia survey. It's a massive survey. They come and talk to me every year about really personal things, but they send me the findings about what happened that year from that survey. So I think that's a really important component of it. do your key spokespeople need media training? Think about that and plan that in advance. And then the final stage is about measuring impact. Was your communications plan successful? We can give you all kinds of data, time on page, hits on websites, as long as they're Monash owned websites, reach on social media, engagement. Twitter gives you your own engagement metrics. If you go into your Twitter profile, you can see that. You can see what the reach and engagement of your tweets were. You can look at link clicks from social media to articles. And even if you do media, we can give you what the equivalent, what it's worth, basically. So, for example, the media work that Amanda Heffernan and Fiona Longmore did was worth $1 million in terms of media hits and pages. So we can give you all of that kind of data. Does that all make sense to everybody? And I guess my take-home message for all of this is that, like, chunk it off. Right? You don't have to do it all at once. And this is why I kind of encourage you to look at your 4 seasons for each project. And because each one is a very finite step-by-step process. So you have your workbooks. You've got some more background information, examples and explanations in those workbooks. And I'm super happy for you, for example, to you know, send me your key messages or send me your elevator pitch and we can refine it. In terms of how things work in relation to budgets, it's also worth bearing in mind that content costs money. And so when you're putting your projects together, if there's a budget line in there for, you know, gathering case studies, for example, to build that into your project. Marketing can't cover all of the research projects that we do at Monash. You can pitch your idea and we can see, I've got an allocated number of photo shoots and video projects to do with the Faculty of Education. But it is worth kind of thinking about, well, what's that going to look like in terms of your project budgets? And also just to plan for it. So even when you're doing ethics, to make sure when you do your ethics that there's a little checkbox in there that says, I'm happy to be contacted to share my story more broadly. So that brings us pretty much, okay, so base amount in dollars would I recommend? So a professional photo shoot costs between $500 and $800 and a video would cost about $5,000. The video, like it's a lot more work. Laura will testify to how much work it is because we produced one about one of your research projects. And so there was probably, I would say there was 3 days of my time in planning and doing the pre-production. You and Justin would have had a similar amount of back and forth with the talent as well. So overall, probably there's about a week's staff work in producing a good piece of video content, plus the kind of the cost of hiring a filmmaker. And thank you, Lisa Hunter, for the pedagogy. Can I just say, guys, how terrifying it is for me to stand and give a workshop to the teachers of teachers when this is not my background at all. So thank you for being so supportive and participating here. But yes, so I think that the photography, $500 to $800. We need to organise consent, and then the video is about $5,000. It becomes more expensive if there are lots of changes. So I would really encourage you, if you're doing video, to, I've got a video production process that you can follow. But the other thing is that the TLS team are starting to do researcher videos as well. They're not as story-based, but that might be something, for example, if you want to show at a conference or you know, share your findings more broadly. For you, Lily, absolutely. I think you need to have a story of change featuring some refugee children taking part in drama. Like, it's so visual. And instead of you as a researcher saying, this project created change, you have a refugee or a number of refugees saying, I feel more confident and empowered now. Or even if they don't say that, you see that. Has anyone got any other questions?
Laura, if we, in terms of costs, if we have video footage, what sort of cost are you looking at to then have somebody like yourself do something with it? So you don't have to get the content, but it's the editing.
That always is, it's always a bit of false economy. So editors cost about, I don't know, cost about $800 a day. But trying to retrofit footage into a story, sometimes it can work depending on the quality of the footage, but it's better to plan it from the outset. So are you thinking of a specific project?
Well, a couple of different ones where we have got footage, but we never had funding. So if there was funding that was able to be found, is that sort of a workaround?
So there is footage.
Yeah.
You would need to, yeah. So, yeah, it's not ideal. I mean, it can make a really nice piece of social content, or it could make a really nice piece that if it's embedded in a bigger article, so it's illustrating a point. But it's better to plan it from the outset. So if I'm going with the example of your women's circle, what was, I'm going back to the top.
The Women's Spirit.
Yeah, like
that's a good example, because I had 4 days of taking video footage and photos, of which they weren't to do that. But that project that I'm trying to get funding for is where they come and construct their own story using that footage.
Yeah.
But so I've got the footage already.
Yeah.
We can't go backwards and get it.
Yeah.
It's sort of the materials there for them to work with if the project gets up, but also in terms of trying to create something more professionally.
So with the women, is there 1 or 2 women that you can think of who are really had a profound change during that workshop?
Yep.
Okay. So one thing that you could do is you could look at, say, using that existing footage that you've got as overlay, but then doing an interview with the women, or getting a videographer to do an interview with the women and to tell the story of the change that they experienced over the workshop. And then, you know, our video editors that we work with could do that quite easily, but then you have them narrating their own experience of what it was like. And you see the picture, and then their pictures come up and they tell that story.
Oh, yeah.
So you can tell historical stories, but you probably, you need to kind of craft the interview quite nicely. And then think about what additional overlay you might need to show what their life, for example, looks like right now.
Yep.
Yeah. You can use that historical footage, but not only that historical footage.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I guarantee you that will help you get a grant. Oh, and in terms of like video length, under a minute for social media, no more than 3 minutes really, before people start switching off. And that's only if people are trapped. For example, at faculty day and they can't leave. Kathy, Lorraine, have you got any other questions? Beatriz?
No, all good. Excellent session, Lara.
Great. This kind of toolkit for you will just be really helpful to work through the steps that you need to be thinking about. And I'm sure like your communications plan is already all, like you've done a really great job on putting that together. But
thanks. Still needs a bit of refinement. And, yeah. But yeah, I think it's really been useful to talk about project specific stuff as well, though, for Each project will be slightly different and need slightly different things.
Yeah. For you guys, compelling content will be really important, and building your networks on social media. So your thought leaders, they would be compelling content media hits, and yeah, building your networks. And Beatriz and Kathy, I love your project. Good luck with your funding.
Thanks so much, Lara. Yeah, we're going to need the luck, but cheers.
No, you won't. You're definitely going to need it. With it, I mean, sorry.
That's because you're helping us as well, Lorraine. So
I haven't got started yet.
You guys need to really think about how you can capture that case study experience, because that's the thing that will help people connect with the research. And people know that international students went hungry during COVID.
Yeah. It's hard because, and I think every researcher here probably has the same question in their mind, that the population we're working with is vulnerable, and we will convince them to talk to us because we can say it's confidential. So then if there's this like kind of thing, maybe we're going to ask you to do a video on social media, even if obviously all the consents are in place and everything, it can kind of, anyway, that's just a conversation to have, something to work out in the strategy. But yeah,
you will find the leaders, and this is also for Lily, and this has been my experience working with people from refugee backgrounds, is there are people that are prepared to speak up to create change. And you'll be able to find them. So it won't necessarily be the people that, it doesn't even need to be the people that you have worked with as a research, in your research, but you will need to have that case study to bring the story alive. So you know,
really, oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Lorraine.
I was just going back to the comment you made earlier, Lara, about how the survey you participate in, they actually send the participants directly the results. And I think, so for Kathy and Beatrice, with your international student project, you know, being able to get back to the students can also then help get people to respond further and agree to be case studies or something like that. But I was just, you know, when you were talking about how it might be difficult to breach confidentiality and get case studies, that kind of closing the loop with participants is a really good way to sort of keep building that trust.
And I mean, one thing that I've known, like I'm coming to it as a storyteller and as someone that, you know, crafts stories on a daily basis for people, that often we feel like we're invading people's privacy by asking these questions. But when people, when you can share people's story in a way that they fully understand the framework and the context that you're going to share the story and why you're sharing that story, it can be really empowering. Because what you're saying is that your story matters and your story is being heard and I'm listening to it, and your story can create change. And so I'm happy to work with you guys if you're thinking about, you know, looking for that case study, but having a really clear framework about why you're doing the case study and what kind of change that you're looking at doing. That's a conversation that you have, you know, after you've done your research. It's not when you're doing your research. So the timelines are a bit different, but kind of understanding the phase, like even the profiles I do of our PhD students, they understand, like I've given them examples of how I've used their, of profiles that I've done. I tell them when it's going to be published and I let them know what the process is in terms of like signing off on the content. So it is kind of like there is a framework around it. When people can share their stories in that way, it helps people feel a bit safer and trust you as the storyteller as well. Alrighty.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Feel free to send me through any blurbs, messages, plans. Let me know when things are happening. Lily, I think your project, when it's off the ground, like when you're actually doing the drama in the classrooms, is a great opportunity to get some photography. Lisa Hunter, I think for you around the providing resources for teachers to confidently teach Indigenous content, people are really hungry for that. And we've done a couple of those articles on Teach Space, but I would really think about what are the other ways that we can kind of support teachers to feel more confident. I think that might be a little bit more about resourcing. All right, guys, have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Laura.
You're
Thanks,
very
Lara.
welcome.
Brilliant
Lara.
as usual. Lots to take on board and think about.
All
Fabulous.
right, take
Yeah.
care.
Yeah.
Bye.